Under the weight of a past stained by the first bloodshed in human history, a lineage begins to unfold. One that would come to represent not only the advances of ancient civilization, but also the dangers of drifting away from God. We are talking about the descendants of Cain, a generation that flourished before the flood in the opening pages of the book of Genesis. Cain, the firstborn of Adam and Eve, is the central figure in one of the most striking episodes of the Bible, the murder of his brother Abel. Driven by jealousy and rage after his offering was rejected by God, Cain commits the first homicide in human history. This act was not merely a crime, it was a tragic turning point that gave concrete form to sin already present since the fall in Eden. As punishment, God curses Cain. The ground would no longer produce good crops for him, and he would become a restless wanderer. Yet God places a mark on Cain to protect him, making sure no one kills him. A strange kind of protection that keeps him alive despite his guilt. Cain settles in the land of Nod, east of Eden, and has a son named Enoch. To honor him, Cain builds a city, trying to resist his fate as a wanderer. This is the first mention of a city in the Bible, showing early steps of human society, even far from God. But this progress comes from a spiritually empty place, showing the conflict between human creativity and moral failure. Cain's descendants move further away from God, filled with pride, violence, and rebellion. Instead of seeking God's guidance, they focus on themselves, building a civilization based on power and self-interest rather than obedience. Genesis 4 gives a short genealogy. Cain fathered Enoch, who fathered Id, then Mehujael, Methusael, and finally Lamech. While the details are limited, Jewish traditions like the Book of Jubilees try to fill in the story, showing how this family developed morally and culturally. Still, the Bible's message is clear. Even as society grows, sin grows stronger. Evil spreads in new ways with each generation, reaching its peak in Lamech. Lamech, Cain's great-great-grandson, is a troubling figure. He is the first man recorded in the Bible to practice polygamy, marrying Ada and Zillah, breaking God's original plan of one man and one woman. He also boasts about violence in a song recorded in Genesis 4:23-24. I have killed a man for wounding me, a young man for injuring me. If Cain is avenged 7 times, then Lamech 77 times. This song shows arrogance and a chilling sense of entitlement, with no remorse for taking human life. Some later Jewish stories even suggest Lamech may have accidentally killed Cain while hunting, mistaking him for an animal. Though not in the Bible itself, these tales highlight the ongoing concern with understanding the cycle of violence in Cain's family. Yet within this morally corrupted line, the Bible still records remarkable human accomplishments. Lamech's 3 sons, Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain, stand out as cultural pioneers. Jabal is described as the ancestor of those who live in tents and raise livestock, establishing a nomadic pastoral culture that would echo through the narratives of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jubal, father of those who play the harp and flute, introduces music into the biblical story for the first time, reflecting the divine spark of creativity even within a corrupted context. Tubal-Cain, a master of bronze and iron, represents humanity's first technological leap, shaping metal into tools and weapons that would alter the course of civilization. These achievements remind us that human gifts are universal, yet their moral value depends entirely on the intent and context of their use. Even as Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain contribute to civilization, their father Lamech exemplifies the perversion of human gifts. The very tools Tubal-Cain creates are instruments of power and violence in Lamech's hands, a chilling reminder that skill and innovation, when divorced from divine guidance, can amplify corruption. This tension between creativity and moral decay becomes a recurring theme, not only in ancient history, but in every era since. Human ingenuity has the potential to serve God and uplift society, yet without reverence for the Creator, it can serve vanity, pride, and destruction. The lineage of Cain demonstrates this duality clearly. Cultural advancement, technical mastery, artistic expression, all emerge from this line. Yet these gifts are tainted by rebellion against God. Music becomes a tool of pride rather than worship. livestock and pastoralism a means of self-sufficiency rather than dependence on divine provision, metallurgy a weapon of personal power rather than communal benefit. It is here, in the misuse of gifts, that we see the first seeds of a civilization built on human potential without moral restraint. While the descendants of Cain represent moral and spiritual decline, the birth of Seth signals hope. After Abel's death and Cain's exile, Adam and Eve receive Seth, whose name means appointed or granted as a divine gift. Through Seth, a faithful lineage begins, and with his son Enosh, people begin to call upon the name of the Lord, a spiritual revival in stark contrast to Cain's line. The genealogy of Seth includes Enoch, Methuselah, and eventually Noah, whose righteousness stands out against a world steeped in corruption. Noah is chosen to preserve life and restore humanity, a testament to God's justice, patience, and mercy amid widespread wickedness. Yet the unfolding story of human corruption is not limited to Cain's descendants. The Book of Enoch expands upon the Genesis narrative, describing the sons of God, angels known as Watchers, who descend to earth, taking wives from among the daughters of men. These forbidden unions produce the Nephilim, giants in stature and power, who spread violence, oppression, and idolatry across the earth. Humanity, already burdened by sin, now faces the compounded influence of celestial rebellion, and corruption reaches unprecedented levels. The biblical text makes clear that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. In response to this unrestrained evil, God declares judgment. The flood is announced, an act of divine justice meant to cleanse the earth of pervasive wickedness. Yet even in judgment, God's grace is evident. Noah and his family are preserved, demonstrating that faithfulness, even in a corrupt world, carries hope. The flood narrative, whether interpreted literally or as a regional cataclysm, illustrates a profound spiritual truth. God holds humanity accountable, yet offers salvation to those who walk with him. The contributions of Cain's line, livestock, music, metallurgy, do not vanish with the flood. Knowledge once created endures through human memory, observation, and divine inspiration. This reinforces the biblical principle of common grace. God's gifts, creativity, and intelligence are universal, accessible to all, but their moral value depends on alignment with his will. The narrative warns that technical skill without reverence or knowledge without wisdom can fuel destruction rather than advancement. As the story progresses, the union of the sons of God with the daughters of men marks a final phase of rebellion before the flood, introducing forbidden knowledge, arts of war, astrology, and occult practices. Humanity sinks further into iniquity, yet God preserves a faithful remnant. This pattern, creativity, rebellion, corruption, judgment, and preservation, demonstrates a divine principle recurring throughout history. God exercises sovereignty, separating the righteous from the wicked, guiding human events toward his ultimate purpose. Even as Cain's lineage comes to an end with the flood, the narrative leaves behind a cautionary lesson. Gifts without moral direction can lead to destruction, power without humility breeds arrogance, and human advancement divorced from divine guidance risks becoming a vehicle for sin. Yet within the same narrative there is enduring hope. Noah and his family become the bridge between judgment and restoration, continuity and renewal, demonstrating that redemption is always possible when aligned with God's purpose. The story of Cain's descendants is therefore more than a historical account. It is a mirror reflecting the tension between human potential and moral responsibility. From the first act of bloodshed, to the moral collapse of Lamech and his sons, to the technological and artistic achievements that arise even in corruption, we see a pattern that resonates through time. Human abilities are gifts that can either honor God or amplify evil, depending on the choices of those who wield them. As we explore the legacy of Cain, we begin to see that history itself is shaped not only by the skills and creativity of humankind, but by the moral decisions that govern how these abilities are applied. The narrative intertwines spiritual, cultural, and technological threads, revealing that progress and corruption are often inseparable when divine guidance is ignored. It is a story that challenges us to consider the purpose of our own talents and the direction in which we allow our gifts to flow. In tracing the rise and fall of Cain's lineage, we witness a civilization capable of extraordinary creativity, yet unable to withstand the moral consequences of pride and defiance. The lessons are profound, extending far beyond ancient history to the human experience today. Unchecked ambition, misuse of knowledge, and separation from God lead to cycles of destruction. The descendants of Cain exemplify the danger of progress without obedience, the cost of talent without virtue, and the fragility of human achievements when divorced from their creator. The narrative continues as the flood reshapes humanity, preserving only those aligned with divine purpose, setting the stage for new beginnings. Cain's line is extinguished, yet the echoes of their accomplishments and their failings reverberate, offering both warning and insight. The story weaves a rich tapestry of human ingenuity, moral choice, divine justice, and enduring hope. A tapestry that continues to unfold, inviting deeper reflection, exploration, and understanding of humanity's place in the grand narrative of creation. As we reflect further on Cain's lineage, one cannot ignore the psychological and spiritual patterns that emerge within this line. From the very beginning, we see a tendency toward prideful self-assertion. Cain, in striking down Abel, demonstrates the capacity of jealousy to twist the heart. This initial act sets a precedent, a dark blueprint for his descendants, the pursuit of personal desire over obedience to God. The restless wandering of Cain is more than physical. It symbolizes a spiritual dislocation, a life untethered from the source of divine guidance. This inner exile becomes a recurring motif in the family line, manifesting as an unyielding drive to control, to innovate, and yet to separate from God's oversight. The story of Enoch, Cain's son, and the city he built carries profound implications. This first city is not merely a physical structure, it is a human attempt to create order, community, and civilization outside the blessing of God. The act of naming the city after his son is symbolic, a claim to legacy, identity, and permanence, despite being a line marked by divine disfavor. Cities are centers of culture, commerce, and human interaction, yet in this context, the city becomes a monument to human ambition divorced from divine instruction. The pattern of constructing, shaping, and mastering the world continues through Cain's descendants, yet it is infused with a spiritual void. The soil may yield abundance, the metal may be forged into instruments, music may fill the air, but these achievements, however impressive, echo hollowly, without a reverent foundation. As generations pass, we witness a deepening entanglement of technological advancement and moral decay. The development of pastoralism, metallurgy, and music by Jubal, and Tubal-Cain illustrates a critical tension in human society. Skill and knowledge are neutral until framed by intention and conscience. Jubal's pastoral innovations foster a stable nomadic culture, yet they can also encourage economic ambition and territorial disputes. Jubal's music evokes beauty, rhythm, and emotion, yet when divorced from worship, it can glorify vanity, seduce, and manipulate the human heart. Tubal-Cain's metalwork opens possibilities for survival, construction, and art, but it simultaneously enables weaponry, domination, and oppression. The interplay between human gifts and moral failure demonstrates a profound biblical principle. The potential for creation to mirror the divine image exists alongside the potential for destruction when human will is unbridled. The narrative of Lamech, both in his polygamy and his boasting song, underscores the dangers of generational amplification of sin. Whereas Cain acted in the heat of jealousy, Lamech's declaration of multiplied vengeance illustrates premeditation and pride. He elevates himself above divine authority, asserting power not as a steward of justice, but as a self-appointed arbiter. This escalation of moral corruption mirrors what we observe throughout history. Transgression compounds across generations, often growing more audacious as structures of power, wealth, and technology accumulate. In Lamech's time, violence is glorified, yet simultaneously tethered to human ingenuity. The same hands that innovate, create, and shape are those capable of wielding destruction, a duality that echoes across time and culture. Another layer of complexity emerges when considering the oral and cultural transmission of knowledge within Cain's lineage. Although the Bible does not provide extensive biographies of each descendant, the fragments it preserves suggest intentionality in skill sharing. From pastoralism to music to metallurgy, each generation builds upon the previous one. This raises an intriguing point. Moral corruption and human progress are not mutually exclusive. Knowledge survives even as morality declines. This duality reflects the persistent tension in the human story. How do societies manage the fruits of talent, creativity, and innovation when their ethical foundations erode? The biblical record hints at this tension in the brief mention of the Nephilim. These giants, born from the union of the sons of God and the daughters of men, embody the consequences of spiritual rebellion fused with human ambition. The text emphasizes their size and power, yet equally their inclination toward tyranny and moral chaos. Here again, we see the amplification of earlier patterns in Cain's line. Strength, skill, and ingenuity become instruments of domination rather than instruments of service or worship. The spiritual decay of humanity is no longer a private matter of conscience. It manifests socially, politically, and culturally, creating systemic corruption that affects all communities. Even the act of urbanization, first attempted by Cain in the land of Nod, foreshadows the complex relationship between human civilization and spiritual health. Cities are hubs of human cooperation and creativity, yet without moral and divine guidance, they also become centers of pride, idolatry, and exploitation. We can trace the seeds of this paradox here. Cain's city represents both progress and rebellion, a theme that resonates throughout the biblical narrative. Civilization without God can flourish materially, but decay spiritually, generating both impressive achievements and profound moral consequences. The lineage of Cain also invites reflection on divine patience and restraint. God's mark on Cain protects him from immediate retribution, a paradoxical act of mercy that allows him to live despite the weight of his guilt. This mercy, however, does not prevent the escalation of sin across generations. It is a reminder that divine forbearance allows human freedom to unfold, freedom that can be used for creation or corruption. This duality between divine justice and mercy, restraint and accountability, is central to understanding the trajectory of Cain's descendants. Human potential is immense, yet its ethical direction depends entirely on orientation toward God. In parallel, the emergence of Seth's line introduces a contrasting paradigm. Whereas Cain's descendants exemplify moral decay intertwined with cultural and technological progress, Seth's descendants exemplify the possibility of spiritual fidelity and deliberate alignment with God's will. The story of Enosh, Methuselah, and ultimately Noah illustrates that human history is not a single unbroken trajectory of corruption. There exists the potential for renewal, for the cultivation of wisdom and moral resilience even amid widespread depravity. This interplay between the lines of Cain and Seth sets the stage for recurring biblical themes: judgment and mercy, rebellion and obedience, decay and renewal. As we delve further into Cain's descendants, it becomes clear that the narrative is not merely about individuals, but about systemic patterns of behavior and cultural influence. Lamech's arrogance, Tubal-Cain's weaponry, and Jubal's music collectively reveal how technical mastery, artistic expression, and human innovation can be co-opted by sin when detached from reverence for God. The biblical text subtly instructs that gifts, though inherently good, require alignment with divine principles to bear lasting fruit. Left unchecked, the same gifts can amplify human folly, creating both material sophistication and moral catastrophe. Moreover, the cultural footprint of Cain's line emphasizes the tension between memory and morality. The skills, knowledge, and innovations they developed, livestock management, musical instruments, metallurgy, likely survived orally or were rediscovered after the flood, demonstrating that human achievements can endure even when their originators are judged. This tension invites reflection on our own use of knowledge and creativity. Are our innovations aligned with moral purpose, or do they risk perpetuating cycles of harm and arrogance? The narrative prompts a deeper question about responsibility. What do we do with what we know? and to what ends do we apply the abilities we have been granted? From a theological perspective, Cain's lineage also illustrates the universality of human sin. While Abel's murder marks the first recorded act of fratricide, it is not the last. Humanity's propensity for violence, pride, and defiance is a recurring theme, one that transcends specific genealogies. Cain's descendants offer a concentrated example of this pattern, a microcosm of what occurs when human freedom operates independently of divine guidance. Their story serves as a warning, but also as a mirror, revealing our own potential for misuse of gifts, power, and knowledge when moral anchors are abandoned. The narrative threads of Cain's line continue to unfold as human civilization develops, showing that material and cultural progress are not inherently indicators of moral or spiritual advancement. In the biblical worldview, true progress is measured by alignment with God's will. Cain's descendants achieved remarkable technological and cultural feats, yet these achievements ultimately failed to safeguard them from judgment. The tension between human skill and ethical orientation becomes a recurring motif, one that challenges every generation to consider the moral implications of their actions, knowledge, and creative endeavors. As we look back on the lineage of Cain, a striking pattern emerges. A civilization capable of remarkable creativity, innovation, and cultural achievement, yet deeply entangled in moral decay and spiritual rebellion. From Cain's first act of jealousy and violence, to Lamech's arrogance and boastful song, to the technological and artistic accomplishments of Jabal, Jubal, and Tubal-Cain, we see human potential unfolding in ways both awe-inspiring and terrifying. The gifts of creation, music, animal husbandry, metallurgy, were never inherently evil, but in the hands of a people separated from God, they became instruments of pride, self-interest, and even destruction. This lineage demonstrates a timeless truth. Human progress is not measured solely by material, cultural, or technological advancement. Without a foundation in reverence, obedience, and moral responsibility, talent can amplify corruption instead of flourishing in righteousness. The descendants of Cain serve as a mirror for all humanity, showing the consequences of turning away from divine guidance and the dangers of pursuing power, knowledge, or skill without ethical restraint. Yet even in the shadow of corruption, the narrative points to hope. Through Seth and his descendants, we see the possibility of restoration, spiritual renewal, and alignment with God's purpose. This contrast illuminates the central biblical principle. Gifts, knowledge, and creativity are blessings meant to serve God and humanity. When properly aligned, they cultivate faith, wisdom, and societal flourishing. When misused, they amplify sin and bring judgment. The story reaches its most dramatic culmination in the flood, a divine act of judgment against unrestrained wickedness. The descendants of Cain are swept away, their moral failure sealed by the waters, yet the preservation of Noah and his family demonstrates God's faithfulness and his plan for redemption. Even the achievements of Cain's line, livestock management, music, metallurgy, were not lost, reminding us that knowledge and talent can survive even amid divine judgment, but only when directed by moral purpose do they fulfill their true potential. Ultimately, the narrative of Cain's descendants is a profound lesson on the duality of human potential. It shows how brilliance and innovation can coexist with sin and corruption, how gifts without guidance can become instruments of harm, and how God's justice and mercy operate in tandem throughout history. The story does not end with Cain or Lamech. It continues in the line of Seth, culminating in Noah and the preservation of humanity. It reminds us that even amid human failure, God's plan endures, offering hope, restoration, and a path toward righteousness. So as we reflect on the sons of Cain, we are invited to ask ourselves, how do we use the gifts we have been given? Do our talents, knowledge, and creativity honor God, or do they serve self-interest and pride? The story warns us, teaches us, and invites us to align our lives with purpose, justice, and divine guidance. If this journey through history, sin, and redemption has stirred your curiosity, leave a comment below and share your thoughts. How do you see the balance of talent and morality playing out in our world today? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe for more deep dives into biblical mysteries, and join us as we continue exploring the fascinating stories hidden in Scripture. May God's wisdom and grace guide you, and may we all learn from the rise, fall, and lessons of Cain's lineage as we walk our own paths.